Hello and welcome to another tutorial. So this time around we're going to be expanding a little bit the system that put together for creating display screens. So the idea behind this was for having in-world screens that they were on an object within the world, so they would take on lighting and shadowing and things like of that naturally from the environment, but that we could still build up our full UI and have our UI work through those. So we had to actually relay events and everything. So we had that working for mouse clicks, things like of that. What I want to add in this time is support for scrolling. So in particular, getting scroll wheel input, as well as also providing a few sort of nice little improvements there to make it a bit easier if you wanted to extend this to do further things. So let's dive on in. So if you're wanting to be working with this and you're wanting to be following along, in the description I do have a link to the code as it currently stands, so you can dive in and use that. And there is also going to be a link to the full set of code at the end of this. And with this, we'll also make it work for both the legacy, the old input system, as well as the new input system. So we'll make sure we've got functionality for both. So starting point with this is I'm going to bring up the code. So this is the code for our display screen, and we have two sides to the code if we remember. So one is for the screen itself, so the thing that is placed within the world, and then the other is for those stages that we set up that hold the actual UI. So there's two parts to this that we need to update. So a couple of things that I want to do with this. So firstly, I want to actually get the scroll information from the mouse. So for the legacy input method for that, I'm going to call this mouse scroll. That is actually quite easy for us to access. We just have that there as mouse scroll delta. Now for the new input system, this is currently turned off, but I can set up the code for this now because I looked into it and looked at how it works. So we keep the same variable name. Now the actual way of retrieving this is a little different. So similar to with the mouse position, we're still going to our Unity engine, input system, mouse current, but then what we want is scroll.read value. Now, with these two, with position, it was actually fine. We got inputs that were exactly matching. So the coordinate systems and the scales, everything like that used for the mouse positions are identical. With the scroll inputs, they actually end up coming through quite different. And it can also vary a bit, I've found, from mouse to mouse, at least with the legacy input system. So for the mouse that I'm currently using, with the old input system, this mouse scroll delta will either be -1, 0, or 1, whereas our mouse scroll here ends up being -120, or 0, or 1. Well, sorry, -120, 0, or 120. So very different scales there. And what I found was if I just used, with the legacy input system, that -1 and 1, it was scrolling too slow. If I used the -120 and 120, not surprisingly, it was scrolling a bit too fast. So I'm actually going to add in support here for a sensitivity setting for it, because that's actually going to be really essential for either input system. With the legacy, we need to scale it up. With the new input system, we'll need to scale it down. So mouse scroll sensitivity. And I'm just going to initially default that to be 1. It's a vector 2 because we could have horizontal scroll input as well as the vertical scroll input. So that's good. What I'll then do is, before I do the scrolling, the other thing I'm going to put in here because as soon as you're doing stuff like scrolling, you potentially want to have the ability to invert that scroll direction. So it's easy to add in support for it, and given that, we might as well add it in from the beginning. So we're going to have invert horizontal scroll, and we'll also have a one for vertical. So I think good to keep those independent, because someone might want one but not the other. Allows for ease of choice, and it's a very easy option to support. So it's a good thing to make sure we support that. So apply sensitivity and inversion. So to do that, mouse scroll .x gets multiplied by our mouse scroll sensitivity .x. I'll zoom in a little bit more. And then to apply the inversion, the way I normally do this is I'll put these in parentheses. So if we're inverting the horizontal scroll, then we multiply by 1. Sorry, we multiply by -1, otherwise by 1. It's a nice easy way to support it. This is why I say it's something where we just might as well always include support for things like this. It just makes it significantly easier for folks who want to have it inverted to do that. And it takes 30 seconds at most of our time to add that in for sensitivity and the actual inversion. So that's good. We can be retrieving that inversion input. Now, our on-cursor input event here, I'm going to modify this so it takes in a second vector too. And then down here, where we were invoking that, we pass through mouse scroll. And if I go over to the dynamic UI stage, I can update this. And this is going to get in our scroll delta, we'll call this. That. So that's good. And we'll be able to set up for applying that. And it's actually not too involved to apply it. It's quite a straightforward bit of input that we need to provide. So there's a few spots where we could sort of process this and actually pass it through. But the key thing is this pointer event for result, when that is getting sent through. Because it's found all of the things that it's hit, and it's passing that information to them. So I want to pass that through. I'm going to do that after we've done all of this common setup. And what I'll do is I will check, is there scroll input? So for there being scroll input, what we're looking for is if mouse scroll, R in scroll delta x, that's greater than our float epsilon, so essentially greater than our smallest value, or, and we do the same check on the y, because if either of them is valid, then what we want to do, and it's quite a straightforward one, our pointer event for result, we set the scroll delta, and then our logic here for how we execute events, we do that. So we do our execute events dot execute, pass through the game object, pass through that pointer event result, and we need to tell it what one it's actually doing, which is the scroll handler. So that looks good. That actually should be all that we need for this to be functional. So let's test that out. Let's see if that actually is working, and we want to test it with both of our input systems. Now, initially, I am not going to do any adjustments here for the scrolling sensitivity. I'm going to leave it as it currently stands. So we'll run it. And it's probably really hard to actually see it, but it is slowly, ever so slowly scrolling as I'm moving the mouse quite a lot. So what I'll do is those sensitivities, I only have a vertical scroll wheel, so I can only provide that input, but I'm setting the sensitivity to 10, so 10 times faster it should be scrolling. And now if I run that, and if I scroll down, that's a better speed, and scrolling up. And if I adjust this so we can actually see a little bit clearer of what's happening, these are nice and straightforward for us being able to actually scroll them. I could test inverting it. So at the moment, if I scroll down, it moves down, scrolling up moves up. If I invert the vertical, then I need to scroll down to scroll up, and vice versa. So we know our inversion's working. So that's good. Well, okay, we know that that side of things is working. That's with the legacy input system. Let's test it with the new input system. So for this, I'm going to go to our package manager, and I'm going to bring in the new input system. Import this. Now, it should prompt me to switch between input systems, but if it doesn't, I can manually switch between these. But it did ask. So, okay, it's using the new input one, and it's asking me if I want to enable the backends for it. So I'm going to, in this case, say no, just so I can show you how you actually change this manually. So I'm going to say no. And then what I will do is if I go to Edit and Project Settings, then under Player and Other Settings, what I'm looking for is this option here, Active Input Handling. And we can set it to exclusively the old one, exclusively the new one, or both. Because I want to be testing each one in isolation, I'm going to actually switch this to the new one exclusively. Now, when I do that, it has to restart the editor. So that's something to be aware of. If you switch input systems, and in particular, you're switching between exclusively one versus the other, you do need to actually restart the editor, and it will prompt you to do that. Now, when I do that, I'll keep project settings here to make my life a little easier. What I'll find is the event system here is using the old input system UI input module. So I have to replace that. Now I'm using the new system, and I've still got these sensitivities. I reset them back to 1. So what I should find is that scrolling is way too fast. And we can see it almost instantly ends up at the bottom of those lists. And if I pause it so we can see this zoomed in, then we see it's changing, like with a single, when I have the scroll wheel on sort of the fixed clicky mode, then it scrolls a huge distance. So what I want to do with those stages is I would more have a sensitivity of 0.1. And with that, the sensitivity is acting more like how I would expect. So the direction is fine. The direction doesn't get messed with. It's really just that sensitivity. But we've confirmed that the system is working with both the old and the new input systems, which is good. So what I can then do is I can switch our player and our input system back to the old one. It will want to restart again, and it'll want to save the scenes, which is fine. And then I can uninstall the package. Now it will, because that new input system is there, it will ask if I want to enable it, and I'm going to say no. And I want to just check, cool, it is set to the old one, so that's good. So then in the package manager, I can go and I can remove that input system package. Technically, I could be running this with both and easily switching that way, have different scenes, but the reason I fully remove it like that is to make it quicker and easier, well, not quicker, but to make it easier and a lot more clear-cut that I have the support properly working for each one independently. It would be very easy otherwise to have it be a little bit messed up. Now, this goes a little bit grumpier when it's trying to switch back the other way. So what I have to do is I have to remove that script that doesn't exist and add the default import modules. And if I do that and I change my sensitivity here back to 10, then I should find that this is back working, which it is. And we've still got our button support, everything like that is working as it did before. So that's good. We have our scroll wheel support in there. What I want to do as well, just as some final changes to this, is clean up the code here a little bit and give a few more options for input in terms of a couple of additional interfaces just to make it a little bit easier to work with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have here, and this will not be public void actually, this will be a protected virtual void process input, and it's going to take in our current inputs that we have there. And the reason I'm doing that is I'm going to take this stuff here that was input system sort of wrangling and move those up to here. And then passed in here will be our different booleans. So the idea behind this change in particular is I'm basically isolating all of the stuff that is specific to either input system into its own section. And I'll end up providing methods for essentially bypassing that. So I'll have process input, normalized position, scroll delta, mouse down, mouse up, and is the mouse down. So that looks good. I'll rename these just for consistency. That, and one final one. And then I'll set up an additional function, which I want those exact same parameters like that, but this will be another on-cursor input that takes in essentially everything. So the idea there is that gives us a way of, if we wanted to, from something external, to fully drive that input. For example, you might want to have some automation logic or something like of that, or even a cutscene. You could manipulate a screen through code, because now this has just a general exposed interface for sending everything that's needed for actually working with the underlying UI. It also means that we have our process input function here that all it was worried about is translating this data into information going into the UI. We've made it protected and virtual, so external things can't call it. But if we overrode this class, we could actually substitute in our own logic there. So we've expanded it up a bit for future functionality if we were wanting to be doing that. And means all of this is just purely UI concerned. So if we changed the underlying UI system, we have a specific single function that we would update, and we've already got those input interfaces and those don't need to change. So it just makes the code a little bit more modular. Now, that shouldn't have broken anything, but because we want to make sure we're testing, we're going to check, okay, well, the buttons all still work. If I click and drag, I can do that. And I'll zoom in so we can actually see this properly. That's better. So I can click on the slider and drag it. I can click on locations in the slider bar and that works. I can scroll. All of those bits of functionality are fully working. So that's good. We've got our setup now with these UI stages where pretty much any user input, at least from that sort of direct pressing, tapping, scrolling on things, that we have all of those up and running and working, and we can have those pass to our UI stages. We still have the setup here that's still working where you can have multiple in-world screens mapping to the same stage. So all of that setup is still working. No issues there with that. So dive on in and experiment with this. See what things you might want to add to this. See what changes you might want to make, how you might want to use this in your own projects. Thanks, folks. Hope you found the video interesting and helpful. If you have, chuck in a like and subscribe. It really helps out. It's really appreciated. If you are looking for the code for the project, there are a couple of links in the description below. The first is a link to the code as it was at the start of this video. So if you're wanting to code along with this, that's where you want to grab. The second link is to the code as it currently stands. So if you're wanting to just go to the completed code, you've got access to that there. Any of this code, you can use that in your own projects, commercial or non-commercial ones. You're fully able to be making use of it freely in any of those. If you have any questions, chuck those in a comment below. And if you're looking for other ways to support the channel, then I do have a Patreon, and there's a link to that in the description also. But until next time, bye.